Alex, we've often heard the cliches that practice makes perfect, and the more I practice, the luckier I get. So there is something there about practice, but there is also, as I said, those cliches. But the importance of practice is clearly important, and I'm just wondering, from your perspective and experience, how do we apply some of those principles of practice and the importance of it, to the commercial world, the world that we work in?
Well, first of all, let's have a look at the reason why cliches are cliches. Cliches are cliches because actually there's a lot of truth in it. All right. So what we're going to be careful to do is not dismiss it because it's a cliche. Practice makes perfect. Yes, it does. But what I think is really interesting in the context of commercial skills and getting better at selling, let's just call it that, just to make it simple, you've got to get the tools out of the box and play with them, because otherwise you're never going to start to integrate it into your natural behavior. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I had a neighbor. That's the first house I bought. I had a neighbor who was doing his banking exams, and he was a really interesting character. I liked him very much, but he never practiced. He never did the past papers. He never really did the hard stuff. What he did was always learn the theory, a little bit like learning by rote, if you will. And he failed, and he failed, and he failed, and he failed repeatedly, year after year after year, because he didn't like the feeling of actually having to practice. It kind of unsettled him.
So that's interesting, isn't it? So that you put all that effort in, but you don't practice and you fail. So what's the reason that people dislike practicing? What stops them?
Well, if you think about learning, and particularly when you start to apply your learning, especially if it's a new set of skills, for example, or it's behaving in a different way than you have habitually done in the past, what it is pushing you outside your comfort zone. And I know this sounds very simple, but let's just focus on this for a second. Comfort zone is a comfort zone for a reason. Inside that zone, you feel comfortable. But what's happening is you're not growing. You're not stretching your boundaries. You're not pushing your capability. So if you do push yourself outside your comfort zone, guess what? It's going to feel uncomfortable. Another cliche is that a mind stretch will never return to its same form. It's true, right? You learn something new. It's very difficult to unlearn what you've just learned. And in fact, your comfort zone becomes bigger. But in order to stretch it, it's going to feel uncomfortable.
Okay, so there's something there about because we often hear people say, "Yeah, I'm really experienced," and it just reminds me of the old adage I once heard, which was, well, have you had 20 years experience or 1 year repeated 20 times? And the only way to get better, by the sounds of it, is to recognize that, and I guess you can apply this to sports and things like that. Champions are always looking to do the basics really well so that they can really excel at those. And I guess there's something there about just that mindset approach there. So how do we apply that to the business world, Alex?
But if you think practically, what you've just said is so true. If you're an elite sportsman, you don't stay at that elite level by just doing what you did. You continually find ways of pushing those boundaries. And in learning and in skills development, in the context of selling, as we're talking about here, it's exactly the same. And if you physically get out and try out new stuff, it's a visceral experience. It comes out of your head and becomes real. And it's really, really important to do that. And frankly, if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're not growing. It's as simple as that. You're not stretching those boundaries. You're not getting better at what you're doing. So you've got to create opportunities to do it. And it's going to be part of your weekly routine. You've got to make it part of what you do. And if you're a leader in an organization, you need to make it expected. But then you need to have people in place who actually expect it of others and therefore are there to coach and to nurture. And I remember going back to one of my first sales roles, I felt pretty anxious, if you will, when I worked with my line manager. Why? Because I knew that part of what he was going to be doing was drilling me and helping me become a better salesperson at the time. So it's having the courage to do that, but also realizing that it's absolutely fundamental to your growth.
So it's interesting, isn't it? So fundamentally, your growth, the two things in terms of company growth, the people have got to grow as well. So therefore, those two things are intrinsically linked. And I think, as you just said, key word there, visceral. So it's got to be something that's just practiced. It's not just in your head.
Absolutely.